and welcome to Swim Chats, a podcast about swimming. I'm Shona Riddell, a writer and swimmer from Wellington, Aotearoa, New Zealand. For each episode, I talk to a different guest from our global swim community. Please hit follow so you don't miss an episode. To support the podcast, you can leave a rating on Spotify or a review on Apple Podcasts, which helps other people discover it. If you're a regular listener, please help me to keep running Swim Chats by subscribing on Patreon for $5 a month. You get previews of upcoming guests, the chance to ask questions, and lots of good karma. To find out more, visit patreon.com/swimchats. There's a link in the episode description.
I'm pretty sure you're the first person I've met who has a PhD in open water swimming, which is so cool. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
When did you complete your PhD?
So I finished the PhD in September of 2025, and it took me just under 5 years to do, actually. So it's a very, very long time coming.
Yeah, I've heard PhDs are a journey, and yeah, congratulations. That's not very long ago because we're recording this in March
No,
2026.
still very fresh.
Yeah. Well, fresh is good, yeah. I first came across your name in an issue of Outdoor Swimmer magazine a couple of months ago. So I know that you're in the UK. I was wondering which part of the UK you're in, just to sort of paint a picture of where you swim and
Yeah, so all of the work I can talk about tonight is based near the Lake District in the UK, so sort of along the northwest coast and then a little bit of the Lake District. And that's because I was based at Lancaster University. So I did a sort of a geography degree, an environment and development masters, and then the PhD in outdoor swimming. So that's mostly where my research is based, but I do have a history of swimming in other places in the UK as well.
oh, cool. Well, yeah, I haven't been to the Lake District, but I've seen pictures of it and it just looks so beautiful and perfect spot to swim. I know that there are like Swim Trek and companies like that run, swim camps there, and it's definitely a dream of mine to swim there. I lived in the UK a long time ago, in the early 2000s. It was a long time before I was a swimmer. Yeah, and so if I lived there now, it would be a completely different experience. I'd be traveling and swimming all over the place, I think, because you've got some beautiful spots over there.
Yeah, it's
Um,
stunning.
yeah, have you been a swimmer your whole life, or was it in
I
university?
have, yeah. I would say my swimming is sort of in four main different periods. So, my early swimming in childhood was down in Cornwall, so in the south of England. I started swimming lessons, I think, when I was about 3 or 4, as everyone, or a lot of people who are lucky enough to do. And I spent a lot of holidays down on the Cornish coast. This is very niche, but there's a small area called Poleseth, and my earliest memories are actually being with my grandparents on that beach. And a few years ago, my sister and brother-in-law, they got engaged on the very same beach. So that sort of has always been in the back of my mind. Being near the coast is really important to me. I love it an awful lot. I then moved up to Lancaster to do my PhD. I'd been there previously as well, and the northwest coast there was a very different kind of swimming. So the area had Viking tombs actually cut into the cliffs, and that was sort of weirdly overlooked by a 1980s power station. And when you get in the water, you're looking at an offshore wind farm as well. It's an area that's very famous for bird migration, so lots of wading birds, ring plover, little tern. It's an SSI for that kind of wildlife because it's sort of got it's a big bay, and the bay's got salt marshes, wetlands, cliffs, bogs, sand dunes, and there's quite a lot of rare species there. So that area to swim in has been very, very interesting, and you sort of get the mix of power stations, rats, sewage, tides, jellyfish. This is very kind of an agricultural, post-industrial UK town that swimming was based in, and that's where I've done a lot of my field work. And then
Wow.
I also did, yeah, a fair bit in the Lake District too, which is UNESCO heritage site, and It's got lots of volcanic and glacial geology. Um, and so that has some stunning waterfalls and things that I've really loved to swim in.
Oh, wow. And so we'll talk more about this later, but that perspective you get from being in the water and seeing the world from the water, you really get to know an area so well, and you see it in a way that most people don't. Like
Mm.
with that level of detail that you just described so well, like you really painted a picture of what it's like to swim there. So thank you. And I imagine in West England that conditions would be a bit wilder than they are in Cornwall in terms of the water temperature being a bit fresher, a bit of chop, and you mentioned the jellyfish.
Yes, absolutely. It can be very, very, very cold there. When I started my PhD, the timing of when I was moving into that subject, it was December. I think it's December of 2021, and the timing of my PhD just meant I had to start swimming on that coastline throughout the winter. So it was a very interesting start to the PhD, but yeah, it was
Very invigorating.
very, very invigorating. Yeah, absolutely.
What would the water temperature be? Would it be sort of 4 or 5 degrees at that time of year or
Yeah,
even less?
probably around that. It felt very, very cold. I remember in my first swim, I was very naive and I had a wetsuit on, but as soon as I got in, my hands and my feet, it felt honestly like ice. And I thought, right, next swim, I'm going to be having the gloves and I'm going to have the boots to make it definitely more comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all about making these adjustments, isn't it, to make it sort of work for us and our individual bodies and
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Were you swimming with a group at the time? People who were able to give you advice on things like
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I had a very, very welcoming community of swimmers, and that was one of the reasons why I decided to swim in that location. And what was very, very interesting actually was my PhD started during COVID. And so outdoor swimming had started this massive boom around that time in the UK. Um, just being outside in general, obviously, had become increasingly more important. And so at the time at which I started, there was about 5 members of the swimming group, and by the time I'd finished the PhD, there was over 7,000 in this community of swimmers that I was swimming with. And they were incredibly friendly, incredibly welcoming. I was taught a lot about the channels and the currents of the area that I was swimming in because it is actually quite a dangerous place to go. There's lots of movement, lots of water that you need to be very aware of. So yeah, they were absolutely brilliant and they made the PhD a joy to do.
oh, cool. Well, yeah, with your PhD, I know there's a focus on wild swimming, which is what you call it in the UK. We're familiar with that term here. We tend to call it more outdoor swimming or open water swimming.
Mhm.
But you also talk about water quality and climate change, so we can get into those topics as well.
Yeah.
But I found it really interesting that I think you sent me a couple of notes about your PhD, and you said previous literature on the topic has focused on health of swimmers, like physical health, mental health, and you talk about that, but also you're looking at the health of the water um, as well as the health of the swimmer. Yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, we this is quite timely because here in New Zealand we currently have a swimmer called John O'Riddler who's an ultra marathon swimmer, and he has set himself the goal of swimming from the top to the bottom of our North Island, which is 1,600 kilometres. And he's yeah, and so he started in January. He's given himself 90 days to do this. So he gets in for a day, does a big swim, like 30 kilometers or so, gets out, has a rest, and then gets back in. So he's been doing this for 2 months. He's over halfway. And he's the end destination of his swim will be in Wellington, which is where I live. So everybody's getting really excited. But the purpose of a swim is not just this personal goal, which will be a world record, but also he's raising attention to the bottom trawling situation that we have in New Zealand.
Mhm.
And there's a petition that goes along with the swim. He's trying to get thousands of signatures to end bottom trawling. So yeah, I just thought it was a good thing to mention here that there are swimmers around the world who are incredible swimmers, but, they're also passionate advocates for the environment and the health of the ocean. Yeah. So is that how you felt when you were writing your thesis?
Um, Definitely. I think in one of my chapters, I think we saw how swimmers are not only sort of immersed in water quality issues, but also implicated. And so I was trying to make a balanced critique of all of the really, really good things that swimmers are doing environmentally. And in the UK, there's a lot of really good work done by outdoor swimmers to try and improve water quality. Um, but I also wanted to balance that a little bit with, and what are swimmers doing that perhaps are potentially damaging, sensitive sites, or what is the impact of mass commercialized swimming events? And so I sort of ended my PhD with this question of what are swimmers doing to their environments, and how can we do a little bit better? But also, yeah, raising the profile of people who are doing really fantastic work. And I think in the context of the UK, especially, the water quality is a really big issue. Um, and people that I've interviewed campaigners, I've interviewed people who are doing citizen science, and they're sort of testing water quality, and they've been protesting on national news, and we're also through to the smaller actions, litter picking, um, and just changing their lifestyle in lots of different ways as well that might be related to their practice, or it might not be. So yeah, it was definitely a theme that ran through my work, and it was very interesting to ask those kinds of questions.
Yeah, that's really cool, and, yeah, as a swimmer, you really sort of see those things for yourself, don't you? And it's the everything sort of becomes intertwined. I feel like everything is connected, and so you can't be an open water swimmer and not think about the environment. You can't avoid thinking about water quality and all those sorts of things. What gave you had you known for a while that you wanted to write a PhD, or was it more something that just sort of came up and it felt
So
right?
I'd always had it in my mind that I loved research, and I loved writing, and I loved interviewing people. And after I'd done my environment and development masters, I had made the application to do a PhD. And my PhD at that time was on a different topic. So it was on climate justice. And I had a real interest in how different people and different cultures looked at, human environment relations. And so a lot of the literature I'd been reading was centered on this. But then COVID happened, the borders were shut, the climate change conventions were cancelled. Um, and as I was saying previously, a lot of people around me, and myself included, were really sort of getting into the outdoors. So there's a scholar who identified that outdoor swimming was a term that got really big traction on Google in the UK during the lockdown. And me personally, I'd started to swim as well. And so I realized that my previous theoretical interests actually really aligned with this new hobby and pastime that I was taking up. And so, yeah, I emailed my funders and I said, I can't do what we've discussed, but do you know what? I really love outdoor swimming, and I'm really grateful because they just said, yeah, absolutely. Just go with it, roll with it. And so that's what I've done.
That's awesome. And when you were looking for people to talk to, were they the people you were already swimming with, or did you have to sort of approach different swimmers or different swim groups and say what you were looking for? And were people quite open to being interviewed and observed and everything you were doing?
Yeah, I think I was very lucky because outdoor swimming tends to be something that gives a lot of people a lot of joy. And so people enjoy talking about the practice that they love. And so starting these conversations was relatively easy. When I first started my research, I started through visiting the local community, swimming with them, asking questions, working out, basically understanding outdoor swimming more, and getting a sense of what kinds of questions to ask. And over time, through swimming with people and asking these questions, I started to develop some research questions. Um, and so the first sort of area of interest was, how do swimmers develop feelings of connection to their bodies, to their sense of selves, and to the wider natural environment. And as I started to work through that, I actually had experiences where I would be swimming in something and I wouldn't know what it was. And, there was one day on a bank holiday and there was, hundreds, if not maybe 1,000 people on the beach and toddlers and elderly, everybody was bathing. And I can only describe of what we were bathing in was just absolutely disgusting. And nobody was sure what the source of it was. And so that led me to think a little bit more about how swimmers can be immersed in environmental quality and environmental debates. And so my research questions changed through time as I was becoming immersed more in that environment.
And I know you've used the term in your thesis, is it immersive knowledge?
Yes,
Yeah. Did you coin that term, or I hadn't come across it before?
I did. Yeah. So for me, it came about because I realized that swimmers are having many different encounters with lots of things. So you've got the flora and the fauna. I think within my research, I had discussions with people about swimming with seals and with whales and even little creatures we have called sea gooseberries that are a little bit
Okay.
kind of like jellyfish, maybe.
I wonder if that's what we call salps. Is it like they're little sort of blobby things?
Yeah, it might
Yeah.
well be actually. Yeah.
I love that
Um,
term, sea gooseberries. That's really cute.
it's quite cute.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I realized that it wasn't only the flora and the fauna that people were swimming with, but it was things like microplastics, antibiotics, sewage, and water is warming. But swimmers come to know those things in quite intimate and interesting ways. And I think, when you are in the water and your skin is the only barrier between yourself and what you're swimming with, in order to protect your health, actually, you sort of need to know what the things are. And so I found that swimmers develop knowledges of water. So a better knowledge of things like channels, groins, rocks, currents, things like this. Swimmers also noticed birds, trees, seaweed, and shells. And there's actually an author called Roger Deakin who, in the 1990s, he wrote a book about swimming the waterways of Britain. And he described swimmers' position in the water as sort of like a frog's eye view. So that means, swimmers are basically a floating head to everything and their size is diminished. And that actually gives swimmers um, a bit of a window into things that perhaps if they're on the bank, they wouldn't have otherwise have seen or known. Um, so yeah, that's where the term immersive knowledges came from. Because I
Yeah.
think in lots of ways, you do have to be in it and not just on the banks or at the coast to really get a sense of what you're swimming in.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, I was going to ask you about Roger Deakin. Yeah, I've talked about him a couple of times on the podcast. I love his waterlog book.
It's an
Yeah,
icon.
yeah, he's iconic. Yeah. Um, there's an academic term, ethnography, which is, sort of long-term observation and interviews, which sounds like what you were doing, really looking into the more sensory aspects of something, both in the water and on the land. And it seems to be becoming more common in academic study. So it's not just the quantitative, looking at numbers, but also the qualitative data, which is, asking people how they feel and observing what they're doing. And so I was wondering if, as part of your research, did you take photos or videos, or were you keeping notes? Like, yeah, how did you keep track of?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. As you know, and I'm sure that many of the people that you've spoken about, outdoor swimming it's so immersive, it's so subjective. There's so many things going on that actually trying to research that is quite a challenge, and that required quite a few different kinds of methods. So one of them, which you've just mentioned, is ethnography. So I sort of did a few different strands of ethnography. One of them was autoethnography, so that's what I described, where I get into the water and I talk to swimmers and I swim with swimmers. Um, there's a few scholars who were really inspiring with that. So one of them was called Throsby, and she swam the English Channel and she sort of recorded that journey. And there's another scholar. Rebecca Olive, who's based in Australia, and she talked a lot about the importance of the pre-swim conversation and like the chats over tea and cake and things like this. Um, Sensory ethnography I did do a bit of because outdoor swimming can be atmospheric and affective. And there's lots of things going on between the body and the mind, so I wanted to try and capture that. In terms of photographs, I did take some photographs myself as I was thinking about what was happening. Um, but one of my research questions centers on what is wildness in wild swimming, because as you say, there is a tension between calling it outdoor swimming and calling it wild. And in the UK, and I imagine in other contexts, wild swimming has some kind of heavy connotations actually. It's linked to commodification, but it also has a lot of history, does wildness. And so I wanted to understand why do we call it wild swimming? What about the practice is wild? And obviously it's a quite a vague concept, wildness. And so I thought I'm gonna try and get people to take a picture of what is wild in their practice. What does that look like? What does it feel like? And then during interviews, I would sit down with my swimmer and we'd talk about why they'd taken this photo and what it represented. And that felt like a more grounded way of discussing what is quite an abstract phenomenon. So photographs were actually really, really useful.
I haven't asked you yet what the title of your thesis is and if we can read it. Is there a
Yeah,
way
so
for me to link to it?
that's a really great question. I'm panicking, so I'm trying to remember the title.
It's all right. I know that they often have quite long titles. Yeah,
It's
but
quite a long-winded one, I have to say. But it's called Becoming with Outdoor Swimming: Connections, Knowledges, and Environmentalisms, and the Implications for Swimmers' Health and the Health of the Outdoor Swimming Assemblage. And it's currently under something called embargo, which means that it's not accessible to the general public at the minute. I think in about 5 years' time, it'll become freely available. But I've done that just because there's a few papers that I want to write, and try and get my research out there in a few different ways. One of which being the Outdoor Summer magazine that you found me through, I believe.
yeah.
I've written another article for The Conversation, which is sort of where journalists can help academics write something in a more accessible, engaging way for the general public. And it's actually that kind of writing that I prefer more than academic writing. So yeah, those two articles are freely available to read.
Yeah, cool. I'll link to them in the episode description so people can go off and read them. Yeah.
Oh, thanks
Oh,
so
that's
much.
yeah. So you sent me, as I mentioned earlier, sort of a few notes on the thesis, and one thing you touched on there was the wild swimming, and why do we call it wild? And with Roger Deakin, I know he sort of writes about it as sometimes a bit of a submersive. No, subversive, a subversive act, where a lot of waterways in the UK seem to be private access or through sort of restricted areas, and he would sort of jump fences and jump into ponds, and so it was a little bit of an act of rebellion. Yeah, is that sort of the impression you got when you were doing your research, that sometimes swimming can be an act of rebellion?
Yeah, I think the rules in the UK around swimming, they are quite confusing. I'm not fully sure of them myself, even having studied outdoor swimming for the past few years. I know that there's rules about, if there's a footpath, you can swim to the side of it and things like this. I think when you said the term rebellion and subversion, there isn't actually an aspect of wildness that came through in that way, but perhaps slightly differently. So, for example, some older women in my study, they talked about outdoor swimming as an act of rebellion and subverting societal norms, and feeling that that was a sense of wildness within themselves, flying in the face of what people might expect from you, how you might look, how you might behave. Um, and so that was definitely an aspect of wildness that came through. I think something that was very interesting And it goes back to what we were talking about before, is that wildness has been mobilized across space and time in lots of different ways. So wildness in the past, was linked to colonization, um, and spaces were demarked as wild so that, they could get carried through processes of imperialism, colonialism, capitalism, and all of these different things. And then within the UK, during medieval Christendom, for example, wildness was understood to be where the devil was, or where Adam and Eve were sort of condemned to go. And then you fast forward a little bit more and you get into Enlightenment, and suddenly, actually, wilderness was a place to feel God's creation through the natural landscape. And what was quite interesting is within my work, those echoes from the past still come through into how people think about wildness, even within the context of outdoor swimming. Um, so, for example, some people were saying that, well, it can only be wild swimming if it's free from human activity, human intervention, and there are no human beings there. Obviously, in 2026, it's very difficult to find spaces that are truly wild by that definition. And so I was sort of more focusing on the feeling of wildness and what creates that. And quite often it was, the product of it's like the relation between a swimmer, their bodies, their emotions, their knowledges, their cultures, their histories, but then also the physical landscape and how those things sort of intertwined. So there's a few different ways in which people can feel wild, and
Yeah,
subversion being one of them.
I love that. Thank you. And yeah, there is something that can feel really liberating about getting in the water, especially in winter. When other people are on the beach all sort of wrapped up in scarves and hats, and suddenly we're in our bathing suits and just running into the water, and people are looking at you like you're a little bit crazy.
I remember I remember on one of my first swims in December in 2021, I remember coming out of the sea and walking across the promenade as people were walking their dog. People were looking at me like I was a sea creature that had just grown legs. Like, "What are you doing?" I got lots of comments like this. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. And in your thesis, you talk about sort of manifestations of wildness, which I like that term, manifestations. And it reminded me of the full moon swims that some of us like to do here. I imagine they're probably popular in the UK as well, where different groups will, some will just go for a dip and some will go sort of swim out a bit further. But yeah, that's something that feels quite subversive as well, I guess, getting in the water in the dark. Let's touch again on the water quality. You've mentioned it a few times already. It's very timely here because in Wellington we've had a overflow of our wastewater treatment plant, which happened about a month ago. It's still ongoing, and of course that's raised a lot of questions about water quality for everybody, but including swimmers and people being unsure about, you know, where the best advice is, because there's the official advice, and we do have places we can refer to. But often with swimmers, it sort of becomes more than that. As you get to know an area and you get to know the people who are swimming, your decisions and your observations become a bit more complex than just sort of looking at a website for a yes or a no.
Mhm.
Yeah, is that something you have found when you were interviewing swimmers, that their decisions about where and when to swim can be quite complicated and personal?
Yeah, I really do believe so. One example that springs to mind was that event on that bank holiday that I touched on earlier. There was basically a big source of pollution. And actually, for context, the beach that I was swimming on during my period of field work was the most affected, for raw sewage in the UK within that year. And so there was a knowledge that there was sewage in that area. But yeah, we had this day where, and there was a lot of commentary from lots of different people within my swim group. There was some people saying it was sewage, some people saying it was agricultural, some people who were saying that it was completely natural and it was something called flotsam. Um, and so I think one of the things for swimmers is you might be able to use things like the Surfers Against Sewage app, which might tell you if there's been a release, but ultimately, you're never quite sure. until you're in the water, and if maybe you perhaps get sick. So there's an unfortunate irony, and swimmers are sort of awkwardly positioned in that they might enter the water to try and improve their physical and mental health, because that was something that really came through in my PhD, and it's been documented a lot. Luckily, we're moving from anecdotes into scientific evidence now for the really, really good things that outdoor swimming can do for health. But when you're in the context of poor water quality, you're actually sort of risking your health. And it's very, very significant for those who might have compromised immune system. So I interviewed someone who was a beachcomber as well as a swimmer, and she said how she'd walk through the strand line and it'd be full of litter. And so it really made her worry about whether she should be swimming in the water or not. And she didn't truly know, as a lot of us don't, what the source of the pollution is.
Mm.
So yeah, there's lots of conflicting sources of information, and it's quite hard to know what to trust and what not to trust.
Do you find as a swimmer your own decision making has changed over time in terms of when you will swim and when you won't?
Um, I would say maybe my actions haven't changed too much, but my knowledge probably has. Before I started the PhD, I wasn't particularly aware of UK water politics and the situation that we're in. I wasn't too aware of the risks either. So in the UK, water companies are allowed to discharge untreated sewage when there's been exceptionally heavy rainfall. And that elevates, pathogens, antibiotic resistant bacteria, heavy metals, pharmaceutical chemicals, which all affect human health. But I think there's also the sense in the UK that because it's happening an awful lot and some of this is thought to be illegal, there's lots of investigations going on about when water firms are allowed to release it and when they're not. A lot of swimmers, and not all swimmers, I just want to make it clear, a lot of swimmers will say something like, right, well, we're just going to go in anyway, and we're going to keep our head above the water. And there'll be small little rituals that swimmers might do. It might be, let's have a bottle of Coke when we get out. And I'm not commenting on the validity of doing that, but yeah, I do think it's a case of swimmers try to think what's best for their bodies and do the best with the information that they have, even if that's quite limited. Yeah.
There's a lot of what we see in the environment and also what we're reading about in terms of water quality and climate change. It can all feel very overwhelming. Do you how do you sort of navigate that, especially in your research? Like, do you find ways to sort of stay hopeful about that sort of thing, or can it some does it feel too much sometimes? Like, yeah, sorry, that's a
Um,
big question, but yeah. Do you sort of see examples of people doing amazing things, and that sort of galvanizes you to keep
Oh,
researching?
absolutely, absolutely. Within my field work, I've just seen some really brilliant, brilliant things. One example that relates really strongly to what we've been talking about is citizen science doing water quality testing themselves. So if they're not quite sure whether the Environment Agency is getting it right, or whoever the body is that are testing British bathing waters, people are teaching themselves. They're funding to get test kits, and they're going out and they're learning how to do that for themselves so that they know when they go in the water that it is safe. So that's really, really brilliant. I'm seeing people signing petitions, lobbying MPs. As I was saying before, I followed a group who've protested on national news about the water quality there. Um, and within my research, I've also followed people who are reporting things that look to be illegal discharges, whether that's from agricultural tanks in the Lake District, because that's slightly less regulated. Um, so that does give me a lot of hope that that's happening. I also believe that just the visibility of water quality issues, it is increasing in the last 5 years or so because so many more people are entering the water. And so if that's happening, then the governments and whoever's in charge will become more and more aware of the issues of swimmers' health whilst being in the water.
That,
So that
yeah,
for me too is also very hopeful.
Yeah, that's cool. And yeah, once you get in the water, you become more of an advocate for conservation and water quality and the environment. Yeah. So,
Yeah, I have people, direct quotes. One of them is someone saying, the more people that are immersed in the water, metaphorically as well as physically, the more you start to become aware and care. And I have many, many people saying a similar thing of once you get into the water, you have a personal investment, and there's ripple effects of that investment within the community and beyond it.
yeah, which is really cool. And yeah, I was going to ask, is there anything from your research that really surprised you while you were writing your PhD?
Um, I think I've had some really wonderful things. I think things that have really resonated with me, and perhaps surprised me too, is the extent to which outdoor swimming can be transformative. So I'd heard quite a lot of things about this before I'd sort of really gotten into that lifestyle. And when I applied it to the context of the way in which we live, things became even more significant. So, for example, in a lot of my writing and a lot of my interviews, I've heard people talking a lot about digital sedentary lifestyles. Lots of people are now working from home, working behind a laptop. You're getting a lot of screen time. I think I read something that was saying in the UK, the average person, 75% of their waking hours, you'll be looking at a screen. And some people have been interpreting outdoor swimming as sort of a process of sensory expansion and then a way to explore the body more. And I think that's really important. And so there's a quote from one participant of mine who said, some people aren't aware of their bodies. They aren't in their bodies. They're cerebral and their body is shut off from their brains. All the sensory feedback whilst in the water, your brain becomes small again and your body, it becomes big again. Um, so that sort of has been quite a significant theme for me. And I also think swimming is a way in which people become grounded. So when I asked people about the physical and mental health benefits, of course, I had, people saying it can boost mood, release negative emotions, foster a sense of personal agency. But I also had people sort of replying within a context of, oh, well, when I go swimming, politics doesn't matter as much. The pandemic feels smaller. Recession and war and cost of living crisis, it all becomes smaller again. And outdoor swimming is a way to slow down and be grounded. So that was quite surprising to me that outdoor swimming can have such a big impact.
It's incredible, isn't it? Yeah, all those things resonate with me. Yeah, and I love that idea that swimming gives you more of a connection to your body, especially that you mentioned earlier. It's the physical reaction you have of getting into the water, and you have to be aware of your body in order to swim to survive in a different medium, and just the feeling you get as well. Like there's just so much to it.
Absolutely. And I had participants who outdoor swimming, it supports the maintenance, perhaps not the recovery of, but the maintenance of their body through things like chronic illness. I've had someone who, was recovering from a stroke and getting into the water actually slowed down their seizures throughout the day afterwards if they've been in cold water, strengthened their muscles. Post having a stroke. And I also had a lot of people who perhaps were getting a little bit older in life and saying, I experience my body differently in the water to how I do on land. So one participant described feeling like they were a mermaid when they're in the water, but they might need a mobility aid when they're sort of on the land. And it resonated with an author from the Lake District, so where I was based doing my field work. They described, and they have a chronic illness, and they said, I might be a disaster on land, but in the water I was a wonder. I felt like a different creature in the water. And that's something that's been reflected in other studies as well, relating to outdoor swimming. I thought that was really lovely.
Yeah, I love that. That's so interesting, isn't it? I know, I've talked to people around here who are in their 70s, and they say, in the water they can do handstands. And, their 70s, like they can do that and they don't have to worry about breaking a hip or something. So, yeah, it's liberating in that way for them as well, that they can sort of be more playful, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
And with the relationship with your body, there's also something sort of freeing about wearing a bathing suit and just getting used to that. Yeah, and I remember when I started swimming, it was about 4 years ago, so it wasn't that long ago. But you start sort of being in people's photographs and videos, and if you're at events, you're being photographed. So yeah, you get used to the feel of that, and also seeing yourself. And I don't know, for me personally, I just stopped caring so much. Like you sort
Mhm.
of get more relaxed in your own body, which is a good feeling as well.
Yeah, I think that really came through in conversations I've had with people. I did discuss this with a lady who was running a business in the Lake District, and part of her business was to run swimming sessions for people who are plus size. And she said that it was such a liberating thing to do, and those were always fully booked out. Um, so many women in particular, but men as well, but so many women I've interviewed have discussed the freedom that comes with that and a sense of body positivity. It's about what your body can do, not what it looks like. Women just feel more safe to be themselves, particularly in environments which are largely female majority, which again is something we don't have very often within a sporting culture. So yeah, it's really gorgeous. And there was a quote that I had in one of the articles that I've written, and the lady says, and it just resonates with what you said so perfectly. She said, "When you're swimming outdoors, there's no glamour. It's a leveling thing." And I think in a world where we're just bombarded with what we should be doing and what we should look like, it's just a way that people can be themselves.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, exactly. Yeah. It's liberating in that way too. So yeah, you stop feeling like you're being told what you need to look like, and it's also liberating for me. I love just not being able to take my phone into the water. You mentioned that whole digital connection, and in some ways, the digital connection is a great thing. Like we can talk over Zoom right now, um, and see each other. But yeah, at the same time, it's just so nice to have a break from all the notifications and the scroll.
100%.
Yeah.
I think people feel sometimes like you can set down an entire identity. If you're a mother, for example, or a wife or a caregiver, you can just set it all down at the banks or the shore and just go into the water, and all you're focusing on is yourself, or maybe yourself and your friends. And again, you're very much embodied. It might be so cold that you're gasping for breath, and at that moment in time, you're not going to be thinking, "Oh, when I get home, I need to cook a lasagna," for example. You're very much in it. You're very much immersed, and I think that is only going to become more powerful as we become more engrossed in technology.
Yeah, it's that whole mindfulness thing, isn't it? Like you can't think about something else when you're stepping into open water that is, a cold, fresh temperature. Like it just brings you right into your body and your mind, and you're just in that moment. And it's such a connecting experience when you're doing it with other people as well.
Absolutely. It's really, really important socially. And that's not something that I've researched too much, because there's been a lot of scholars before me who've done some really great work on that. But the sociality of outdoor swimming is very, very important. And that provides a really big health benefit alongside, the more physiological changes to your body that happen in the water.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, there's the pre-swim rituals, and there's the post-swim, like you've got to have your hot beverage and talk with everybody as well. And there's a poet in Wellington called Kate Camp, who I've interviewed on a different episode, and she wrote a poem about everything that's around swimming being sort of just as important almost as the swim itself. So it can be the conversations, it can be the coffee, also the gear that you take to the water. And for everyone it's something slightly different. So for her it might have been something a friend knitted, like a knitted hat, or something that she personally benefits from. And we all have our different rituals, slightly different ways. So yeah, I find that quite interesting as well.
Yeah, I remember when I was first getting into the culture of outdoor swimming, I realized so much of the culture of outdoor swimming is actually happening outside of the water. So one of the methods that I did use was digital ethnography, um, because I realized that social media is producing and reinforcing and changing and shaping the culture all of the time. And you were mentioning before, weren't you, about people taking photos and videos and that becoming part of outdoor swimming culture. And when you were talking as well about bobble hats, over in the UK, I don't know if it's the same in New Zealand, but we have dry robes.
Yeah, we have, you can buy dry robes here, and there are also similar products. So yeah, I've got one it's called a passenger robe, and it looks exactly the same as a dry robe. Like it's the big sort of windbreaker, Sherpa lined, and I use it all
Yeah.
year round because Wellington is the windiest city in the southern hemisphere. So even in the summer, it's it's good to have one. Yeah.
Yeah, but even these items become quite a big part of the culture. So for example, in the UK, there's quite a big debate around whether you use a wetsuit or you don't use a wetsuit and what it means if you do and if you don't. And dry robes are quite contentious almost. It sort of signals to other people how you approach outdoor swimming, and quite a lot of equipment might be associated with its commodification. And so some swimmers, not all swimmers, but some swimmers might say something along the lines of, "Oh, well, I am not so fond of swimmers who wear a dry robe, who get a cappuccino, who take a photo for Instagram, but they don't get into the water and properly swim." And so there might be the idea that a true swimmer, and I've got inverted in, in quotes here, but a true swimmer might be someone who just strips off and they've done it since the age of 5 and they go in and they come out. So it's really interesting how the culture's also built around what you wear or what you don't wear and how you present yourself and those kinds of behaviors that are seemingly innocuous at first, but actually might say something about your identity as an outdoor swimmer.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So when you're swimming yourself, you don't have to admit to a dry robe or not if it's contentious. But are there what sort of gear do you like to take with you when you go for a swim, and what do you like to have afterwards?
Yes, I'll be very honest. I do everything in my power to be very comfortable. I'm not ashamed to say it. I swim through the seasons, and I will wear a wetsuit when I feel like it's cold. And in particular, I might actually not have the wetsuit on, but I nearly always have the gloves and the boots. Um, I can be one of those swimmers where I don't like it if something touches my leg and I don't know what it is. Things like this. So I do make sure to just swim in a way that brings me joy, basically. And while I'm on the topic of confessions, I also am more of a dipper than a swimmer. So I can swim to survive, and I'm an adequate swimmer. I trust in my swimming ability, but I don't tend to go out too far. For me, in my personal practice, I love to be in a really lovely landscape, get into the water. I like to dunk my head and just to feel everything. And sometimes I just bob and I just have a look and I soak it all in rather than, going out to the buoys or the poles. Um, so that's my style of swimming, I have to be honest.
Yeah, I love that. Well, this is a judgment-free podcast. It's a safe space. And I'll say myself, like, I wear a wetsuit for longer swims. And yeah, I like my dry robe equivalent. I wear that all the time. And I'm kind of unusual in that I tend to take the wetsuit off in the winter and then just do the dipping close to shore. But yeah, because I like the feeling of cold water. Yeah. So like you say, you do what brings you joy, and I love that way of expressing it. Yeah, because we're all different, and we have different body types and needs and times of the day or year that we swim or distances, whether it's dipping or ultra marathon. To name two very different distances. But my swim coach, Barb, always says, the main thing is that you get in,
Yeah,
regardless of how far you go. Like, yeah.
absolutely.
Because I
Absolutely.
remember when I started, I'd say, oh, I just got in for 5 minutes. And she'd say, you got in, you showed up and you got in. Yeah,
It's
and
all about doing what's best for you and your body and, yeah, how you're feeling that day and what your hormones are doing that day and how stressed you are. Because all of
yes,
those things can have a really big impact on your body's ability to cope with the temperature of the water, particularly as it gets very cold.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so what works for you one day might not work for you the next day, and it's about listening to your body
Yeah,
and making
listen to your body and what it's saying. Yeah.
yeah.
And we all have different reasons why we're doing it as well. That's another thing. So you have to, my friends and I always talk about trying to go back to our whys, remembering, because sometimes you lose track, you sort of get distracted by what someone else is doing or get a bit stressed about feeling like you have to do a certain thing and you sort of bring it back, well, why am I doing this? And then
Mhm.
once you remember that, things sort of become a bit clearer, I find. And
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. I mean, across my research, I could of the well, it was over 30 people that I spoke to, but of those people, there was obviously similarities in why people are doing it, but there was also so many different whys. Grief, getting over grief, fostering mental strength, shedding different identities and building new ones. Lots of different reasons why people get into the water, and I think that's the real beautiful part of it, actually.
yeah, totally agree. You mentioned earlier that your thesis is under embargo while you carry out a bit more research. You're writing some other papers. Are you able to talk about those papers? I'm just curious now, or is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not currently conducting any more research. My period of time at the university's finished, but there was quite a lot of things within the thesis that I wanted to, yeah, basically publish and to talk about. And there's a few different papers that I'm thinking of doing. One of them is talking about the wildness slightly more. I think that was something I just found so incredibly interesting. So maybe I'm being slightly self-indulgent, but I think there's something very, very interesting in there that I could talk about. I think my last chapter looks at different kinds of swimmers and how they're trying to navigate waters and the nexus of sort of health, commodification, and environmentalism. So I spoke to some swimmers who were involved in the outdoor swimming industry. So they might have been running, guiding, they might be swim retailers or actually having like theatre productions and more creative things related to outdoor swimming. And so I had some very interesting conversations with people who, might be making money from this new and growing industry. And there's a lot of tensions that happen there because outdoor swimmers typically are people who care very much about the environment that they're in. And so there's some research around how do people hold these two kinds of tensions and what happens when the outdoor swimming is only getting bigger. And so yeah, there's a few different things I'd like to publish, fingers crossed.
Oh, well, that's really exciting. And if people want to sort of follow along with your career and your research, what's the best way for them to do that? Are you on social media? I know you're on LinkedIn.
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. I've had a few people suggest that I start some kind of online presence, possibly a social media page. I think maybe Instagram would work quite well. It's not something I've got around to doing just yet. I still feel like I'm recovering from finishing the PhD. So yeah, I can't quite answer that at the minute, but hopefully, yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully we'll find out over time.
Yeah. Oh, well, if you come on Instagram, let me know.
I will
I'll
do.
follow you.
Thank
Um,
you.
and we talked about Roger Deacon and Waterlog. Are there other swim writers that you admire or books that you particularly enjoy related to the wild swimming topic?
I do have a few recommendations. I think if you're really interested in outdoor swimming, you should definitely subscribe to the Outdoor Swim magazine. I know that you've interviewed Ella Foot and Simon Griffiths in the past, so I would fully recommend subscribing. They have some wonderful features in there across a range of different topics. So that is something that I would definitely check out.
Such a
Um,
good magazine. Even though I'm on the other side of the world, I still find a lot of the articles really relevant to my own swimming. And
Yeah.
I've got a print subscription, and so just getting it in the letterbox once a month. Don't get much in the letterbox these days. Most of it's
No,
digital,
it's
so it
lovely, isn't it,
feels
when
like
you
a
get
little
the
gift.
physical
Yeah,
article.
yeah,
Bring it back.
yeah.
Yeah, I would 100% recommend their work. There's also the Outdoor Swimming Society. They do some really wonderful work. They publish a lot of recommendations for books, different articles. I think something that is somewhat frustrating to me is there's a lot of really good research happening, but kind of behind a wall, in academia. I could say so many names of swimmers who are doing absolutely incredible things in the field, and they are also publishing their work in open access journals as well. Um, so yeah, there's a range. There's a range of different things to follow, I think, if you're interested.
Awesome, thank you. And is there, just before we sort of wind up, I think we've been talking about an hour, is there anything else you'd like to mention that we haven't already covered?
Um, no, I think maybe the thing that I would end on is possibly where we might need to pay more attention in outdoor swimming. So, a lot of the research we have currently is, and this is talked about a lot in a lot of previous research, but it would be quite interesting for me to look at young people's experiences of swimming. So there's a lot of research that goes on, and it's typically belonging to white, middle class, female swimmers who are in their 30s to 60s, and they might have the cultural and financial capital to access outdoor swimming more easily than other groups. So I think it's really important that we have more research on different kinds of groups. I also think young people in their 20s in particular, there's a whole host of people who perhaps don't swim as much. There could be more research into that. I think there could be more research on how the industry is affecting outdoor swimming and the health of outdoor swimming ecologies. Um, quite a lot of transparency around the mass commercialized swim events in particular as they are growing. Um, I think that would be very important. And yeah, lastly, I would just say that outdoor swimming can be very transformative. And I think that people who do outdoor swim, it contributes to them living well as an individual, but also relationally with other beings. And I think when you get into the water, it might create some space for reversing the trends into some of the trends in society, of increasing disconnect between us and our environments, us and other people. Um, and yeah, it's great to just slow down and just show that we're connected to other human beings, other living beings, and that we recognize the interconnected vulnerability of the things that we're swimming with the water, the animals, pollution, and changing climates.
Yeah, that's exactly, and very well put. Thank you. And it sounds like there's a lot of potential there for more theses and more PhDs in wild swimming. So,
Absolutely, but probably not from me.
anyone else out there? Yeah. Cool. Oh, I've really loved talking to you, Abby, and your word. It's very inspiring what you've done with your PhD. So, yeah, thank you. And
It's wonderful, wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much for the invitation.
I look forward to reading more of your research and following along. And like I said, we'll link to your conversation article and your outdoor swimmer article and any other publicly accessible writing that you're doing. Yeah. And
Thank you so much.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Thanks for listening to Swim Chats. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with a friend or two. Also remember to hit follow to be notified when I post new episodes. To help other people discover the podcast, you can rate and review it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. If you're a regular listener, please visit patreon.com/swimchats to support the pod. Enjoy the water and we'll see you next time.